the pizza, and the important thing is the restrooms are down the hallway. So you go through this door, and the second door on your left is the restroom. Henry, may I introduce you to the group first and give us a little overview? And your sign will be when the pizza guy shows up. Boy, is this good time.
The best guy in town, too.
Yeah, right there.
Okay.
Esther will give you a tip and all. Thank you, sir.
So I was going to give you an overview of what I was going to do, but I think what I'm going to do is eat pizza and drink soda and then just relax and go home. I'll make this really short because I know that the pizza is very good. What I'm going to do is give you a slide presentation, and it's on the title. I think the title that I started with was the last 200 years of glass making in Wayne County. But I see on the flyers that it's Dorflinger Glass, 200 years in Glitter. So that's really good because I have to cheat for the pre-Dorflinger, but I can go from memory on the Dorflinger. So I will do that. I have lots of slides. What I wanted to do, though, is focus on, because this is the Genealogical Society, I wanted to tie in, it'll be a little short on the history of glass making in Wayne County, but it will talk a little bit about some of the research tools that are available and some of the information that I'll present, how we found it and how it relates to how you can find it about your ancestors. I wanted you to be able to find your glass-making ancestors. If you don't have glass-making ancestors, some of your coal mining ancestors and silk throwing mill ancestors and that. So that's what I will do. First we're going to do pizza. Are we ready for pizza?
Yes, pizza's almost ready.
We have to figure out how to work. This is the first time I've ever done a presentation using a digital projector. And it's all based on faith, because I put my absolute faith and trust in Joe Breyer. I said, can you get one? He said, yeah, I think so. I'll let you know. And he said, yes, I got one. And I was like, okay, I'm going to rely on him to have the habit, and I tested the stuff to see if it worked. And the most important thing is that it had the dongles, the connections. So, I don't know if I can remember what I'm doing. I'm usually facing the screen when I do this. Okay, we need to do this as PowerPoint. This is not PowerPoint. I have to cheat a little bit. Okay. As I said, this is going to be on 200 years of glass making in Wayne County, with a heavy emphasis on Dorflinger, but also from the idea of genealogy. And so what all of us as genealogists know what this is.
Is that the Glass Factory Cemetery?
Yes, this is the Glass Factory Cemetery. I didn't expect that much detail. This is the Glass Factory Cemetery in Bethany. And it's a little hard to read this. If you play around with it, you can get it, or if you get a better photograph. But this is, I'll read the inscription, sacred to the memory of Christopher Fotz, a native of Upper Saxony who died August 16, 1831, in the 60th year of his age. He was one of the first settlers of this part of Pennsylvania, abbreviated. To him belongs the honor of introducing the manufacture of glass in this part of the country. So most of us, when we think of glass in Wayne County or glass in northeastern Pennsylvania, you think of Dorflinger. Dorflinger was late coming here, but he was the dominant person. But Christopher Fotz was one of that first group of glassmakers who came to Wayne County, Pennsylvania, and that was in 1807. And that was in what is today Pike County, over north of, are you familiar with where Milford is?
Yeah.
Matamoras, and then Port Jervis. The first glass factory was just above Matamoras, along the Delaware River. And that's one of the genealogy tie-ins is the, think about migration routes. this group of, I mean, 1807 is very early for any kind of glass factory, but for northeastern Pennsylvania, why? Why are they coming here? And, which is a good question, and I'll try and answer that. We think there's some research being conducted on Christopher Fotz. Supposedly, he is the first person to bring the method of cylinder glass production for making flat glass. And I'll get into that a little bit later. But this cylinder, there are two methods of making flat glass at this time in 1807. One is called the crown method, and the second is the cylinder method. There are some references that say Christopher Fotz was the first person to bring the crown method, or the cylinder method, to the United States. He and his family came to, they landed in Philadelphia in around 1802, and this is where I have to cheat with dates. Yes. They were in Philadelphia in 1804, and he and several other members of, several other people who were involved in this factory went to the upper Delaware, and this is the middle of nowhere at that time. And this is even before, I mean, I think they're just starting to discover coal in the northern, like Carbondale area. I think they're taking coal out of the ground near Wilkesburg, but this whole area is wilderness. They're creating a glass factory. Here is a map. This is a map because of two reasons. The original scan is this is a vague thing of Wayne County at that time, which is most of us, all of my Wayne County friends here. By the way, these are my designated hecklers. They are the only ones who are allowed to heckle me. But if you follow this, this is the outline of present-day Wayne County. This is Pike County today. But when this was happening, this glass factory was established. It was established over here, and which is along the Delaware River here. I just stuck this in because I had it, and it doesn't work as well on this. This is one of the ways that they plotted this, or found out about this factory in doing research. At this time, it's you're dealing with land records and property transactions. That's how you're documenting people. And although later these people appear in the census, but this is Glass House Rocks near Mill Rift, Pennsylvania, which is actually up above. The glass factory was up along the, I think, along the top of it. And one of the reasons of locating here is an abundance of wood and sand. There was sand on this site. And the other major reason would be transportation, the Delaware River. What they did is they came up from glass factories that they were working in Philadelphia, moved up to way up north along the upper Delaware, where they could manufacture glass, and then floating back down to Philadelphia. And this factory, which was called Rockville, was advertising in newspapers in New York City, in Philadelphia, and Easton, selling their product, which was glass window panes. The major reason for these glass factories in this area were window panes. They made other pieces of glass and types of glass, but their major production was window panes. And the first group here was Christopher Fotz, Adam Greiner, Christopher, Jacob, and Christian Heinz. And that was this early factory in Rockville. There is nothing left of that other than some cullet. Glass that was dumped out. You can still find glass 200 years after it was made along on that property, although it's private property. It was successful for several years, but and this is typical, each of these factories, it's pretty much the same sort of family group coming in and establishing it. They run it in a particular area for a period of time, maybe about 10 to 20 years, and then it's not successful for whatever reason, and they move on to another location. And it may be a newer generation of people, but it's still the same family groups. And so in Rockville, which is the first one, They were not successful, and at one point they ended up being taken over by Jacob Ridgway. And this is Jacob Ridgway, and I believe he was a Philadelphia investor. He was large in Philadelphia, but and he may have been involved in sending these people up here in the beginning, but it's not clear. You're dealing with 200-year-old records. But I put him in here because it's in the picture, and there are no pictures that I can find of Christian Potts, Christopher Potts. In documenting this, genealogy-wise, there are not a lot of resources at this time, but there are tax records. There are also things like this that appear in court records. This is a petition of Christopher Potts for a private road. And this details where the private road is. This is a private road going to the glass factory. And I believe on this there was actually a drawing of a map on this original document that has a sketch of the glass factory, or where the glass factory is located. And the sketch was important in this early research. As a matter of fact, there it is. That is the designation for glass factory. And even blown up, it's like, this thing was probably only about the size, about less than half an inch on the paper. But that's a cone furnace. Anyone who was ever familiar with glass making knows that that's what the cone furnace. This is what you would find up at that site right now. It's cullet. It's glass that was probably dumped out of the pot, or a pot broke, and it started to run. So they just dumped it, or it would be the end of the day and it was not usable. And so this is what you'll find on that site, that it can still be found. It generally tends to be greenish. They were using local sand, and that sand probably had iron oxide in it. And iron oxide will cause your glass to be greenish. We don't have a lot of examples. There are no examples of glass from Rockville other than that color, or bits of dumped glass. But this is just an illustration of a glass blower blowing glass from a banknote of that time. I think this was from a banknote from Vermont. But here is a glass blower. If any of you have been to Corning, you've seen them blowing this. Again, I use this because it's a great illustration. Focus. I mentioned the two methods of making flat glass. So if we take flat window glass for granted, there were two methods being used. One is the crown method, where you take glass, a ball of glass, and you blow it into a small bubble. You open the bubble and you reheat it. So you have this ball of glass at the end of a pipe. You've reheated it. Then what you do is you spin the pipe very fast. And you get this. It spins out into a disc. I think this, I just look at this and think, this looks like fun. But you remember the glass is probably about 12 to 1800 degrees Fahrenheit when he's doing that. And it's solid, but it's not completely solid. But if you look at this disc, imagine once that is laid flat on a table and is annealed or cooled, that has to be cut into squares and rectangles. The trouble is it's a circle. There's going, no matter how you put squares and rectangles in it, you're going to end up with waste. And this is not an efficient way of making flat glass. If you've ever been to New England and seen windows in some of the early homes, there are window panes, and some of those panes have a bullseye. If you've ever seen that thick bullseye, that's the center right up there. And that, in some cases, I have a piece of glass at the museum, that's almost an inch thick at that point. As you would get further out to the end, it may only be like 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch thick. So it's a wasteful way of making glass. The Christopher Potts comes here with the cylinder method. And I don't have a good illustration of this, but I'll try to describe it. If you imagine him blowing this glass, standing over a deep pit, 12 feet deep, and he starts to blow it, and he starts swinging the glass like a pen, or the rod like a pendulum, and as he blows that bubble, it elongates into a cylinder or a tube. It comes out in a tube. When that's taken off, and that tube can be anywhere from a few feet to, I think, 8 feet usually. Although I've seen one in Corning where they blew it, it was 22 feet long. And there were some commercial factories that did that, where the glass was, I mean, it was like 3 stories high, this tube for this cylinder. The idea is you have this tube, and imagine like a large, like a test tube that's closed at both ends. They crack off the curved part here and the curved part here. Now you have a cylinder. You take that cylinder and score it down the middle with a hot poker or a hot pipe, and that'll crack it on one side. And so you take this cylinder and you reheat it with that crack in it, and you can start to open it up in the furnace and push it out flat. Now if you take that, you have this long rectangle, and so you can cut that into squares and pack it for shipping. In the 1830s, I think in 1837, one of the descendants of this group of glass workers, when I say descendants, one of the companies that came down from them, was producing 20,000 feet of glass per week. Here these people were working in the wilds of Pennsylvania.
Did they cut that glass while it was still hot?
No, the glass had to be cooled and annealed before they would cut it into squares.
What kind of cutters would they have used? Because I worked in the glass field for 7 years. We used little wheel cutters.
I'm not sure what they used to cut, but these are my designated hecklers. I think he's my cousin. I haven't proved it yet. I can say that to him. But I need this remote, otherwise I have trouble. Anyway, the family group in Rockville continued on, and eventually the factory was bought by Ridgway, and eventually the factory went under. It was no longer in production. Shortly before that, Christopher Fotz and some of his partners, Adam Greiner and others, approached Jason Torrey, and who owned or represented the landowner. Jason Torrey owned land, or he represented the land? In Wayne County, on the what is today in the town of Bethany, and several of those glass workers from Rockville picked up and moved to Bethany, and they established. By that point, I think this Bethany was. I think Bethany was now the county seat for Wayne County, and if you're following, if you pay attention to local history, and that's extremely important in genealogy, you need to understand the area you're researching, the local history, because that will help you tremendously in doing your research. Because if you understand the migration routes, why people move from this area to that area. Bethany was developing. This is the beginning of the Delaware Hudson Canal. Is its very early beginnings. The Wirtz brothers are from Carbondale, creating Carbondale. I won't say anything about Carbondale because I'm from Carbondale. But anyway, this is the Bethany Courthouse, correct? Okay. For our purposes, it is. That's what it says in Bethany. But Bethany's the county seat. The population is shifting west over toward the Homestead area, where eventually the Gravity Railroad and the Delaware Hudson Canal are going to meet. And this, again, transportation. You have the Delaware River, now you have the Delaware Hudson Canal and the Gravity Railroad, although that is not yet here. But this group of glass workers moves to this area because it's starting to develop, and there will eventually be a transportation route, but also there's access to lumber and sand. And in Bethany, there are several ponds that exist, and I think they pulled sand from those for use in the factory. This is the original site of the Bethany Glassworks, although I think most of this no longer exists, or this is just a little bit of the remains. But Bethany went into production. There's a little bit of overlap with Bethany. It became A. Griner and Company, and that began in the winter of 1815, 1816. And the factory opened in July of 1816 as A. Griner and Company. Adam Griner was one of the original people involved with Rockville, and the Fotzes, and some of the Fotzes followed him over here. The grave of Christopher Fotz is in the Bethany Glass Cemetery, near the former Glassworks. And let's see, this went through several partnerships and was successful and not successful, but Christopher was pretty much out of the picture, and his son Jacob was one of the major glassmakers here. It was Jacob who carried on the tradition of glass making in here. The factory was closed by 1848 because of a fire, but it was now some of the original family group went from Rockville to Bethany. Now you have some of those same family groups going from Bethany to the next glass factory in Wayne County. But stop to look at a few examples. These are examples. Some of these are in the Historical Society in Homestead, and some of these are in private collections. It's very hard to identify glass from this time period to a specific company. But these are things that would be made for use every day. And even though it looks relatively crude, but when I compare it to some of the Dorflinger's glass, this is relatively crude. It doesn't look like it's a high quality glass. You see little bits of air bubbles and things, and it has a rough ponton where this is attached to the pipe. But this rolled rim is a little bit of extra work, and that gives that rim extra strength. And it's a little bit of skill on the part of the glass maker. But this is not their major production. Their major production was still window glass. They were making window panes. Some of these are on loan to the Dorflinger Museum for this year. For our 200th anniversary, the Wayne County Historical Society was good enough to loan us several of these pieces, including this one, and I think this one. I have a color for this. It's not all black and white. But the colors in these are not, this is not Dorflinger cut crystal that's absolutely pure clear glass, but some of these colors are really, really neat. And this was deliberate. This was a deliberate color that they wanted to achieve. It's not because they were using lower quality sand that had iron in it. You have ambers and turquoises and greens and that. And that's all coming out of Bethany. This is just an interesting document that was found in research, and it is a sketch of one of the buildings, I think in Bethany, sketching out the window layout. You can see why all this glass that would be needed for that particular side of the building. And I think it's 1817. This is earlier. But it's still Bethany period. I think this is a building in Bethany. One of the things that always keep in mind in your research is that it's amazing some of the things that you can find that still exist. You may not have last week's pay stub, but this is from a factory account book from one of those early factories. I think this is from Bethany. It's from 1827. You can see by Christian Fotz, who was Christopher's son. looks like 4 planks. And then this is for, looks like James Manning for glass sold, I can't read the names, for something McKinney or whatever, but Ishmael, which may have been a store or that, but Jacob Fotz. Please read. If you're looking for names of people who were connected with this glass factory, there are probably a dozen of them there. But these books still exist, and if you're looking for something like this, look in local historical societies. Genealogy societies probably don't have anything this old, but historical societies have been collecting it, material like this for much longer, and they may have the original material, but this is just an example of what exists out there. And this is some more glass factory accounts. The Historical Society of Homestead was also very good about loaning us one of these books for our exhibit. It may look like dry reading, but if you're a Fotz, there's lots of great stuff in here, and there are still lots of Fotzes around. And Manning is an old name. I know Manning's Dairy. I'm sure that if you look deep enough, there may be a connection. And this is one of the day books. But for an early glass factory, I mean, the amount of documentation in here, I think there are 3 or 4 of these books that exist covering a period of about 20 to 25 years. And it tells you down to the inventory of the houses of the workers. So if you want to know how a glass factory worker in 1827, what was in his house, this will tell you, because it tells you the tools, it tells you the furniture, it tells you the type of things that they had within the house. So this is really a great resource. I mean, you have to dig to find material like this, but this is just a boring column of numbers. I'm sure it meant something to the Fotzes. Bethany was in operation until about the 1848, when it was destroyed in a fire. But a major thing happened in the Homestead area in 1828 when the Delaware and Hudson Canal opened. I got to get that number right. I think the Gravity Railroad opened and the Delaware and Hudson Canal was opened in 1828. Are there any railroad people who are going to correct me?
The opening was 1829.
1829, okay. See, this is a glass talk. Railroad people, murder and mayhem, this lady here. But the opening of the canal and the Gravity Railroad was a major thing for northeastern Pennsylvania, and especially for Homestead, and for our glass workers. Not so much because there are lots of things going on, but the canal had a major impact on that, and one of them was that Bethany was no longer viable. It was in the opposite direction of the canal. For those of you from like northern Lackawanna County, or any of you from Susquehanna County, are you familiar with Dundaff?
Yeah.
Dundaff had a glass factory in 1830, started by these same men, but the person who was behind Dundaff was trying to develop Dundaff as he was the entrepreneur. I think it was Gould Finney. There was a bank. There were newspapers in Dundaff in the 1820s, 1828. Gould Finney was trying to develop that, and he was trying to convince the Delaware and Hudson Company to extend its canal to Dundaff. And if any of you know where Homestead is in Dundaff, you can see why they didn't make any sense at all. But when that did not happen, Dundaff died. But for a very short period of time, there was a glass factory there, and it was operated by the same men who were running this factory over in Bethany. With the opening of the canal, that group, and especially Jacob Fotz, established a glass factory on the other side of Homestead, which was closer to the canal, and so he could use that as a transportation route for sending product out. They would still be using wood, and wood was a major was the major fuel source in the factory. As a matter of fact, I think it was in 1840. One of the major impacts of that, Jacob Fotz started a glass factory in Tracyville, which is, if you're familiar with Homestead, there's the falls. As you go out of Homestead on your way to Holley, on the left is a beautiful waterfall. I have an image in here of that. But that is where that glass factory was. And it was started by Jacob Fotz and, in 1846. And it was there that he came up, that was where they were making 20,000 feet of window glass a week. The Jacob Fotz, the son of the original Christopher, came up with a way to anneal glass. It was a McKinsey. He created an improvement to the manufacturing of glass involving drawing the glass from the flattening oven, where they opened it up and flattened it out, through the cooling and annealing oven. So he made the process, and that it was like a conveyor belt, a metal conveyor belt that took the glass from the hot, where they were working it, slowly through the steps in the process to it came out at room temperature at the other end, annealed. And that was important, and that is still used, that concept is still used in glass factories. I know over in Port Jervis, New York, they're still using the conveyor belts. Dorflinger used them to anneal them through the annealing oven. But the Fotz's, Jacob, had a major setback in 1848, though, when the wood pile, his stockpile of wood, accidentally caught fire and burned. This virtually destroyed the factory as it was. It wasn't the factory, it was the fuel supply. And there are advertisements in some of these 1830s, 1840s newspapers where they're buying, I mean, a lot of wood. They're hiring, they were advertising for workers, I think in Easton and Bethlehem area, for laborers to come and cut wood, cut and saw wood. But in 1848, the Tracyville Glassworks supply of wood was destroyed in a fire, and so that was it for Tracyville at that time. The factory was purchased by James Brookfield, and Brookfield made a major innovation, and I'll get to that in a second. But the canal is keep in mind transportation, that's the major thing in the development of these factories. This is the Homestead Glassworks. You see the train here, I think this is the Erie branch, Jefferson branch of the Erie Railroad on the Lackawaxen River and the canal towpath. So I'm so close so I can't see. But the factory was there and the falls were up along here. Whose house is where?
Don't know if my house was there then.
We can blow it up a little bit. See my hecklers. I rely on them for facts.
Where in Homestead was that?
This is Route 6 today, roughly Route 6, coming this way. The Purple Cow ice cream bar was here, or the donut shop was in this general area. Was a Dunkin' Donuts, and then the falls are right behind it. I mean, only in northeastern Pennsylvania can you have this like fantastic cascading multi-level waterfall, and you build a donut shop with all the windows facing Route 6. And nothing, I don't even think the bathroom windows face the house. And it's still that way, that's probably why it's empty right now. But Tracyville was taken over by Brookfield, and Brookfield, James Brookfield, is developed the first glass furnace to use anthracite coal. And can anybody see why he would do that? Millions of tons of coal, anthracite coal, are coming out of the Blackwater Valley and over to Homestead where it's stockpiled, and then it's zipping right by here. So he creates and he patents the first furnace to use anthracite coal. And Brookfield, if you collect insulators, you should recognize glass telegraph insulators. You should recognize the name Brookfield because Brookfield developed insulators as well that were made here, and then later some of them were made in Holley, and then later in his factory he moved to Brooklyn, New York, and that's where most of his insulators come from. Brookfield insulators made, and they're stamped Brookfield. but this was the Homestead Glassworks, probably about, Homestead Glassworks and Tracyville are the same thing. It's just they're called different names at different times. By this point, it's called the Homestead Glassworks. And this is probably about the late 1840s, or actually the early 1850s. And this thing prospered under Brooksfield for a number of years until, and here are some of the happy workmen. Some of your ancestors may be in here. This is a bad picture, but if you recognize anyone, let me know. This comes from a stereo view card that was taken by Ludolf Hensel. And I'll talk a lot about Ludolf Hensel in a minute, or in a few minutes. But this is a great image, and you can see all these guys are up all over the roof. I think some of this, one or two of these buildings may still exist. I'm not sure. There's the falls, and it's a gorgeous view. And in fact, it's generally over on this side. But one of the problems, I mean, besides fire, which is a major problem in any glass factory, it's a potential problem. The other, when you build anything next to water, you always risk flood. And this is the dam that used to be above the factory, up there. And in 1861, I have to check my dates. In 1861, there was a heavy rain, and that dam gave way and washed out much of that. And just as an aside, a lot of this was washed out. Some of you, a few years ago, may have read about a bridge collapsing in Homestead. There was a bridge off Route 6 that crossed this creek that just fell. Fortunately, no one was hurt. I mean, it wasn't mine subsidence because it's Wayne County. But in order to replace this was a long political battle to replace that bridge because it only serviced about 20 homes. And there was another entry, but the man who owned the business here was, I mean, his business was here, but people couldn't get to it. And he was very angry, and it became a long, drawn-out battle. But they decided to they didn't replace the bridge, they created a very ingenious access way. They just made the road go up to Route 6 and not have to cross the water, which was great. But being Pennsylvania, you have to do lots of things before you do that. And one of them is they had to do an archaeological dig because there was potentially, I think they found a blacksmith shop.
There wasn't one.
There was a blacksmith shop, but they also found, they went down, they did a test pit of like, I think 12 feet, and they found sand where there shouldn't be sand. And they found bits of glass, and I think they found a pipe, and they found things that shouldn't be there. They couldn't understand why there was sand there in that point that was above the canal and above the river. And they talked to the Historical Society, and they talked to Dr. Bart, who did most of this research. And he said, oh, well, that's because of the flood of '61. And it was like 1961? No, he said 1861. Well, that wiped it out. It washed all the sand that they had stored down. And so there was this huge deposit of sand that's down under the ground, or down below this. And so it confirmed information that we already had from other sources. But Homestead Glassworks, Tracyville was out of the picture by 1861, washed away in the flood. That's just a map illustration. These are some examples of glass that was produced at Tracyville/Homestead. And we just back up. Again, it's not a high quality glass, but it's practical. And they have that extra little bit of glass at the top to strengthen the rim so it doesn't crack and break against things, or knock against things. I'm sorry, all my illustrations are, almost all of them are black and white, except they're really good. This is the glass furnace patent by Brookfield and White. And I put this in here. It doesn't make any sense to me because I think it's sideways. But 1853, what I want to tell you about this is, if you're doing any kind of research and you think your person, one of your ancestors may have been an inventor, go to Google and go to Google Patents, and you can type in Carbondale, and you will come up with a list of, you should narrow it down by Carbondale, PA, but you will come up with, the Google search engine for patent records is better than the Patent Office search engine.
Oh.
And you can find patents that people did, and I mean, they're patents that you wouldn't think of, and people who are patenting things that you would not think of, but it's a resource that you don't, I mean, who thinks of that? But you can search for names, last names. It's not perfect, because it does, I think they scan the microfilm, and then they did optical character recognition on that. So sometimes it may come up with SMITB instead of Smith, because it reads that last H as a B. But you play around with it, you can find things, and we have found some things from Dorflinger and men in Homestead just by searching on a locality. And I did it for Carbondale and came up with, I think, over 100 and some patents, just in a quick search. But if you dig down through this, you may find one of your ancestors.
What's the website?
Google.
Google what?
Google patents. And when it says Google Books, Google, Google
Images,
pardon?
images.
Google Images, it's the other one, or more.
Mhm.
It's in there, but it's patent searches. But they generally, what the computer scan reads is something like this. And so Brookfield, you might need to play around with that. It may search for Brook and Homestead, and you may come up with a combination. But it's a resource that most of us don't think about when we're doing research. This is one of the most common things that was coming out of the Homestead Glassworks, and it's a mineral water bottle. These come in all kinds of colors. Some are more, they're all collectible, but they almost all say Homestead, Pennsylvania, Homestead Glassworks, PA. Some of them have a backward S, and it's the color that adds to the rarity. But these are found washing up on the beaches. These got around. They're found washing up on the beaches on Long Island. I saw one for sale on eBay that had been found in a New York City privy. So this stuff was going all over the country, or at least the East Coast, which is all that really matters. This is a flask. I think this is from the Historical Society's collection, but these are commercial things that would be used for everyday stuff. I don't think that. But this is, again, they're still making window panes. Window panes were their major production item, but they were making commercial glass like bottles, and they make flasks, things like this. Some of the pitchers and jugs and water goblets and that. I think they call it fancy goods. But when it comes to fancy goods, this is the man. Christian Dorflinger is, as I said, when you talk about glass making in Wayne County, all these other businesses were successful, not so successful, not so successful. This is Christian Dorflinger. He had built a successful company in Brooklyn, New York. As a matter of fact, 3 successful companies, starting out making lamp chimneys and lighting type glass. And it was the success of his kerosene lamp chimney that helped him establish these 3 glass factories in Brooklyn, New York. And it's where he decided to focus on making high quality lead crystal. And that is what sets Dorflinger apart from other glass makers. When you see some of the glass that I'll show you in a minute, his glass was considered some of the finest glass produced in the world. And you can still put a piece of Dorflinger next to the best glass that you have or that you can find, and it stands up 140 years after it was made. It's still as good as or better than the best that's produced today for the clear glass. story is that he came here to retire from glassmaking when he was 35 years old. But he may have bought into this thing, and these are, I think, the same guys on the same roof of the Homestead Glassworks. I put this in here because I had 2 copies of it, but Dorflinger may have, for a short period of time, put this back into production. We're not sure, but we're doing research on that. But his real story is White Mills. His focus is White Mills, Pennsylvania, where the Art Glass Museum is, and it was in 1862 that he started to build that factory, and by 1865 it was open and blowing glass. But this is a bad picture of the farm that Dorflinger bought supposedly to retire on. This lake is still there. This fed water down to the Delaware Hudson Canal. This is the original image is bad. It's not your eyesight. But this is the old farmhouse that Dorflinger lived in for 10 years before he moved into the larger building. But half a mile away from this, down the hill, away from the creek, along the Delaware Hudson Canal, was where Dorflinger built his factory. But his first success came from Brooklyn, and his biggest success was in Greenpoint, where he was right along the Newtown Creek, and it was here that he made glass for this place. Does anyone know what this is? I'll let go of something to drink. Does anyone recognize that? Oh, you guys know this stuff. Give them a chance.
They were ugly.
It's giving them the pizza. That's what keeps them quiet. They're digesting. It's warm. But this is the White House. Dorflinger made, while he was in Greenpoint, made a set of glassware for the President and Mrs. Lincoln. And this is an example of one of the pieces. This is a punch cup, and this punch cup is in the museum. This punch cup is really only this big, and it's impressive when you're looking at it that big. But this is all lead crystal. It's colorless glass with lead oxide in it to make the glass soft enough to cut. But you can see up here, it's a little hard to read, but that's a variation of the presidential seal. And the words E pluribus unum on the banner. If you go to the White House and you look at the Lincoln pattern glasses, and it does not say E pluribus unum on the banner. It was not made by Dorklinger. That was made by one of the other glass companies, probably. I can't remember it, but this was first ordered in 1861, and it was reordered through the years up until the last time this pattern was ordered was 1901. But this punch cup shape was only ordered once early in 1861 because the punch cups were used and they used spoons in them, and so there was a high breakage rate, and these were expensive. This probably was $2 or $3, and at that time, I think in 1861, $2 or $3 was a lot of money for a punch cup. Especially that time, I think the public actually had access to the White House. When at the president's inauguration, the people were allowed to go in. That's why after Andrew Jackson's, I think the White House had been trashed because of all of his supporters going in and standing on furniture and taking furniture, breaking furniture. But Dorflinger's big success comes from Brooklyn, but he moves here to retire. He starts building a factory in White Mills. This is the blowing shop and the pot room where they make bigger pots. And he expands it. He's building glass workers' houses to house his employees, and he's expanding the operation. And you can see it's working its way down the hill. The Delaware Hudson Canal is right around in this general area. And there was a canal basin built for transporting material in. And Dorflinger brought in all of his material. The sand came from, a lot of the sand came from the Berkshire Sand Mine in Massachusetts because it was almost pure silica. It had to come in barrels because they had to pack it in barrels because they couldn't just take the loose sand in the canal boats. Remember, all these canal boats are going out from northeastern Pennsylvania out to the Hudson River, filled with anthracite coal, and they're coming back empty. So Dorflinger's got these canal boat captains or haulers saying, look, I want to bring stuff in. Can you give me a good rate? And I mean, they were glad to do it. But you couldn't just put sand in the canal boats because there was all this coal dust. And the coal dust would get into the sand and it would ruin the clear glass. And so it had to be shipped in barrels. And Dorflinger was doing that, but he also shipped the finished product out by canal. And so again, that transportation, if you understand transportation and local history and the way things develop, you can figure out, it will help you in your genealogy. How many minutes?
Can we break?
We can take a break. Yes, History of Wayne County. Buy this book, because that's where most of my notes are. I told you, the Dorflinger materials from memory, the early stuff is not. But this was printed by the museum with a grant from the Heritage Valley Authority, and it is the glass industry in Wayne County, Pennsylvania, 1807 to present.
And I think you should mention the index, which is every known glasswork.
Yes, I'm flashing Mr. Breyer, am I okay? Okay. The index, Dr. Barb and Kurt Reed wrote this book. I mean, they did a tremendous amount of original primary research. I mean, literally digging up things out of the ground, but reading newspapers and that, and I mean, going through tax records and property transaction records and all that. And when Dr. Barb did the book, Dr. Barb and Kurt Reed did a book on the history of Wayne County for its bicentennial, the first thing I said is, well, Dr. Barb, well, the first thing is, wasn't going to use pictures because the pictures, it's too expensive a process. Because, I mean, he was used to dealing with highlights for children where you have to do all this process to put a picture in, and it costs a lot of money to put a picture in printed material. And so I said, Dr. Barber, just scan it. I mean, scan it and you plop it in, it's very easy. Oh, well, great. And so he showed me one of the early drafts of the Wayne County history book, and I said, Dr. Barber, where's the index? Oh, that's too complicated. No. I said, but Dr. Barber, it's not really a serious book if there's not an index. And I think that got him thinking, but it still didn't solve the indexing problem until Ann O'Hara, and who else? Just Ann O'Hara indexed the book, because Ann...
No, there were people who did it for
Other
last
people.
minute, but I made the list.
But that's the reason the Wayne County history book has an index, is because Ann O'Hara, and I'm proud of Dr. Barber to make me think that, I mean, that was important, and it is. And when this book came along, it was much easier, except the line was that this one needs to be indexed because all of the descendants of these people are going to want to buy the book. That's not been the case when they can take it out of the library and just photocopy the pages that they want. But many of the descendants do buy them. But there are, I don't know how many names are in here. There are probably over 1,000, maybe 2,000 names of glass workers in this book, and that is the major reason for this. Some of these names would not have come out without the research that they did. Dr. Barb was going through newspapers I remember going with him to the Holley newspaper up in the attic, and he's literally on his knees going through page after reading every single page, looking for names of connections with the glass industry. And there's a really good one. Now, this is just an aside, but one of the glass factories was having a problem with people were, they were complaining about their wages. And the men were complaining about the wages, and the women were complaining even louder about the wages that their men were bringing home. And the factory owner realized that the factory owner decided, you know what, I'm paying these guys a fair wage, and I want people to know this. There's a lot of baloney being there's a lot of talk going on, but, so he took an ad in the newspaper, and if you have a glass worker work for this company, you're going to love it, because he took an ad and he listed all the different categories of glass workers and how much they got paid, and which individuals, what the names of the men who worked there. This was not a good thing for the men, because the problem with the men was that they were being paid $30 a week, and they were giving their wives 20. So this is a brilliant thing on the part of the glass maker, because, or the glass company, because it was like, you know what, hey, I'm paying fair wages, and here they are. John Smith makes $25 a week. And Mrs. Smith finds out that she's only getting $20. Where does the extra $5 going? And so
The pub.
wherever it went, it didn't go after that advertising. But if you have a glass worker descendant, and if you have any connections in Wayne County, you can probably be certain that at some point you're going to find somebody that was working in some way related to the glass industry, even just along the side. If your person worked there and their name's in there, it'll be in the index, and you'll get to tell that story. And that's another part of the process of doing this, is don't just focus on the names and the dates and the places. Find out about the different things that are going on and in the area and the world, so that you can spice up your family history. All right, so Dorflinger has established this factory in White Mills, and it gets bigger, but that was a bad scan and it blew up. It's toward the end. I'll show you the big picture, but this was it as of about 1880 or 1878. This is a large operation. This is larger than any other glass factory in Wayne County up to this point. Probably all of them combined and then some. They were probably producing, at this point, easily 2 tons of glass a day. And this is lead crystal. This is high quality lead crystal. And the difference between crystal technically is any colorless glass. So the windows are crystal. My eyeglasses are crystal. Jelly glasses are crystal because they're clear or colorless. Lead crystal has lead oxide added to it. And today when we go into a good jewelry store or a good department store and want to buy lead crystal, it has to be at least 24% lead oxide. The lead was added to the sand to make it soft enough to cut without breaking. And that's the difference between lead. That's what lead crystal is really about. But technically, any colorless glass is crystal. But this is a glass maker in the glass factory. You can see that cone furnace. This thing just went up another 3 stories. It's all brick. And it's hard to read here, but I noticed when you blew this up here along the top, just over the opening, it says NO1 best. That is the #1 best metal, which is the molten glass Dorothy was producing. So they knew that was #1 best. The other one may have been a lower quality, so they knew what was in that particular pot. The pots were about as large as this bookcase and probably this wide. That held the glass. I think they held 800 to 1,200 pounds of glass. But this is White Mills from a 1872 map of Wayne County. And you can see, you have to think transportation. You have the river, but you have the Delaware-Hudson Canal coming in through here. The glass factory is up here. Let's see, tenement houses are there in a row, and I'll show you a picture of that in a second. But Dorflinger built houses for workers, and this was the hotel, and that was eventually expanded and became the Dorflinger family home. But again, this is another great resource for genealogists, old county maps, because it tells you some of the businessmen. See Dorflinger. There's a whole list of other names. This is cut out just from the White Mills version of it. But you can think transportation, and it's really all about location, 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 and research. even maps that provide information. Names of people, and this is R.F. Mandeville. R.F. Mandeville, I think, was a carpenter, and he built the glassworkers' houses that are up there along the tenement. And that is that row of houses. You know, the museum, the Dorflinger Museum, purchased this one and has restored it to the period of the 1870s when that map was published. And the interesting thing is that this row of houses was built for workers, and we know a lot of those workers, and we know that through genealogy research. When we were trying to establish that first group of glass workers, it was done through genealogy. It was just pure genealogy, trying to document them in a specific place in a specific at a specific time. It was done through tax records. It was done through some family history. We had access to some of the descendants, and we managed to piece some of the family stories together. But this row of houses was built for the first group of 6 or 7 glass workers to come here from France to open White Mills as a glass factory. And some of the descendants are still living in this house, and the one that's on this side of the street. They still live in White Mills on the same street that their family started on 140 years ago, which is amazing. And one of the great things about the glassworkers' house is that the house next to it had a flagstone, and in the flagstone were cut 3 names. Some kids had sat there and chiseled out their names on this flagstone. And not only, they didn't do it in block letters, they did it in script, which is pretty impressive, especially when you think that their names were Orville, Earl, and Percy. And if you want a genealogy challenge, that's easy. See if you can find Orville, Earl, and Percy in Texas Township, Wayne County, in any census. I'll give you a hint. Start with 1910, because you will find them. There can't be that many families that have Orville, Earl, and Percy, and it was the Branding family. And one of the ladies who does interpretation of the house, she agreed to volunteer as an interpreter, and she went there for training. She said, "Oh, I'd like to do that." My family came from White Mills, and she was learning about the house and what to talk about. And they were telling her about the flagstone, and she said, Orville was my father. So that doesn't just happen in Wayne County. It's all over. It's a small world. But she is interpreting the house that was like next door to her father's. Now we're interpreting it in the 1870s, but her father lived there as a boy in 1910 with his uncles, Orville, Earl, and Percy. Dr. Barb, who did the book, was the main force in getting this building saved and restored. And we put in a water pump, and this family would not have had an indoor water pump and to pump water out of a well. The well would have been outside, and several families would have gone to that. But Dr. Barb was trying to get this old pump working, and so he took it to the hardware store, and one of the guys there was trying to help with it. Dr. Barb can't help but talk about things that he's doing. He's very enthusiastic in that way, but it works, because he's talking to this man about fixing this pump, because he needs the pump for this house, and they're doing the house, and and he gets to the flagstone, and the guy says, "Percy was my grandfather." So,
That's great.
it's a great story. But the first group of workers here were the Lutz family, the Laternus family, and the Schild family. They were all interrelated, coming from France. I managed to track them down on I found their ship passenger arrival in Manhattan, in New York. I can't find my own great-grandfather. I've been looking for 25 years. I managed to find strangers. And I did it the hard way. If you're doing research, it's like, we did it methodically. We started with today, and we worked our way back, and we found when they supposedly came to the United States in their citizenship papers, and one of them became a citizen, but he didn't write the date, and we were searching through rolls and rolls and rolls of microfilm. They used to do it that way, microfilm. And went through, it was like he had to have given the wrong date. I've looked through every person who arrived in New York from January to May of this year, and they're just not in there. He gave the wrong date or the wrong year. We need to narrow this down. And so managed to find his brother's record, his first papers, his Declaration of Intent. And his brother was meticulous and wrote the exact date of arrival. I mean, the day, the date, and the year, and the place in New York. And he went right to it. Boom, there it is. And it only took about 40 minutes rolling through microfilm to find it. And I was overjoyed. I called Dr. Barb on the phone because I thought, I'm in New York City. I just found this thing we've been looking for. The Francois and Nicholas Lutz and the Laternus family ship passenger arrival record. And I'm going to walk outside and get hit by a bus, and he'll never know. So I literally called him on the telephone. I said, here, write this down. I gave him the microfilm number, and I said, here it is, and it's March 6th, and it was this ship, I think it was the Atalanta. That gets into a whole other story, because the ship on the outside of the paper was one name, and the ship on the inside that the captain wrote was another. And we had to prove that we had to prove that the one on the outside wasn't the one, because the ship Atalanta, or whatever it is, was connected with Jenny Lind. And so Dr. Barb ordered the ship picture and information about Jenny Lind, and he had all this stuff. And it's like, Dr. Barb, that's not the right ship. Well, it says on the outside. No, it's not the right ship. The ship is this, whatever it was, the Atlantic. But it says it on the outside. I said, but the person who wrote it on the inside was the captain. He should know the name of his ship. And we traced it down, but anyway, we proved that it was not the ship that Jenny Lind came to the United States on. It was just the one with the Laternuses and the Lutzes and the Shills, but that's important for us. I forgot where I'm going with this. I ramble on. Maybe 2 hours isn't enough.
Next picture.
No. This had nothing to do with what I prepared. I'm off in genealogy.
Doesn't matter, it's interesting.
All right, my whole point in this is I found the Lutzes. We did it exactly the way you're supposed to do it. Because, in the early years, they had the Germans to America, the indexes. And well, I had used those years ago, but I didn't have any Germans. I had Irish, and famine immigrants didn't have them, so it was impossible to find them. So, the German immigrants, that was only for a period, and that didn't cover the period I was looking for. So, in my joy of calling Dr. Barb and telling him about finding this, I walked through the new section of the New York Public Library where they have the open shelves and they have all the indexes, and it's like, oh, Germans to America. There are a lot more of them than I remember. And it's like, oh, they have the year that I just found. And opened it up, and sure enough, I could have gone to that book and found it in 3 minutes. But I did it the right way. But the lesson in that is always go back to sources that you used to use and revisit your information, because sometimes you see it in a different way, or sometimes that resource has expanded and there's more to it, or there's more available to you, or there's something in there that you didn't need before. Don't write off, oh, well, I did that once before. It didn't work. All right, we diverted. Now we're getting, the reason this is here is because Francois Lutz made these glass stockings with flowers for the stoppers, and that's based on a French paperweight of the 1840s, 1850s. Dorflinger trained in France at the same factory where Lutz came from. They may have known each other, but Dorflinger brought the Lutzes here, and Lutz was making this gorgeous pair of decanters. This is another story that I'll tell briefly. These were sold from White Mills in the 1860s, maybe 1868, 1869. They ended up being sold at an auction in London about 10 years ago. They were bought by a dealer in California who shipped them to Dr. Barb on approval. Dr. Barb thought we couldn't live without these, but the inside of the glass was thick and had all been discolored. And so he decided to buy them with the intent that he would give them to the museum, which eventually he did. But So they went from White Mills, somehow ended up in London, ended up recently with a dealer in California, sent to Dr. Barb in Homestead, and then he sent them to be cleaned on the inside to somebody in California, who sent them back. So if I only had the frequent flyer miles on this. But this is a spectacular example of Dorflinger's glass from that early period, 1860s. And when you look at these bottles, and you think that this glass was made 100 plus years ago. It's amazing. And this is the Holy Grail in trying to prove that the Lutzes were here in White Mills. And they weren't glassmakers that were up in Sandwich, Massachusetts, which they were. All the glass literature tells about Nicholas Lutz being the master glass gaffer at Sandwich Glass in Cape Cod. This is the Holy Grail, proving that Francois Lutz made those stoppers for the Dorflinger Glass Company. I mean, we have his name on it. This is $75 in full for labor of glass flowers delivered to the D Glass Company, Francois Lutz. He was paid $75.50 on February 17, 1870, in White Mills for making those glass flowers that would eventually be encased in the stopper. And you can see in here, this is a family note, or you can interpret something from this paper. This is Francois Lutz received from Christian Dorflinger a due bill for the amount which I left with him, amounting $1,074 and I think $6,100. So it's like $1,074. That's a lot of money. Dorflinger was probably holding. Lutz probably left his money with the company, like a bank, while he was working there. He came here in 1866, and his brother, and they worked here for Dorflinger, and they had extra work beyond their normal factory pay. This was the stuff they made at home and sold to the company. And so he probably banked this. And then in 1870, the family story is that Francois Lutz and his brother Nicholas left here because the winters were too harsh, and so they moved to Cape Cod. There's something wrong with that story. That's a family story that has come down to. There has to be a reason, and the reason is probably because Francois Lutz and Nicholas Lutz were sympathetic to the labor union movement, which was starting here, especially in the 1870s. You have Terence Powderly and all that. And so the answer to the question that started this long ago was Dorflinger good to his workers? And the answer is yes and no. They were paid much better than, I think, unskilled laborers in the coal mines of northeastern Pennsylvania. It was less dangerous working in a glass factory, but they also had a higher skilled level. So they had something to it. But if they were in a union, he was not happy. He was anti-union. This is just Dorflinger closing out his accounts with Francois Lutz. I'll just put that in there because I'm going to need it. This is, I just stick this in here because this is a descendant of one of the Laturnuses who came here in 1866 with the Lutzes. And his descendants are still in White Mills. And so I think this man's son was the curator of the Glass Museum before Einstein. And he's been very good at sharing information with me. Okay. This is, I'm going to go through these really quickly. This is White Mills going in. This is the White Mills Dorflinger factory. This is Route 6 today. I'm just noticing when this is blown up this big, you can tell it's still horse-drawn. Last year, or earlier this year, we had a lady, Colleen Fitzpatrick. If you read some of the genealogy magazines, she identifies things in photographs. And I've been dying to try one of the things she does, which is to find out the exact date and time that a photograph was taken based on the shadow that's cast and the direction of it. And this is one of the ones that, one of the photos that I think I can do that with. If only that building were still here. But this is Route 6 today going into White Mills and curving around here. And behind it is the large stone building that still exists. As a matter of fact, this chimney up here still exists. Everything else here is gone. This is the lower blowing house where they blew some of the glass. This is inside the blowing shop. It's a bad photograph, but it's here because in the first group of immigrants were French, German, Alsace-Lorraine, coming here in 1866, 1870. And you also had some of the cutters were Irish, some of the Irish. So you have an influx of those ethnic groups. In the 1880s, there are a large group of Swedes coming in to White Mills to work for Dorflinger. And so you'll see, I think this man is I forget, I think we have an identification of him, but I think he's Swedish. So that also is, I mean, if you're looking for particular ethnic groups in White, I mean, you can help narrow that down as far as time. This is from a postcard of White Mills, and you can see these postcards on eBay all the time, although this is an uncommon view. And the reason I stick that in there is because if you're looking to dress up your family history, like with images, if you don't have a picture of your ancestor who worked in a glass factory, get a postcard of the factory. At least it gives you some visual image, because no one really cares about your ancestors other than you, and sometimes your own family doesn't. Make it interesting. This is a really bad picture in the 1870s. Dorflinger exhibited at the Centennial Exhibit, and that was an important event in 1876 at the Centennial Exhibit in Philadelphia. And remember, our ancestors didn't just come here and plop themselves down and never leave. I try to argue that with people who say, oh, well, they never moved around, they didn't move around. It's like, it was easier to get from Scranton to New York City in 1870 than it is today, because you could hop a train and go and be right there. Or Philadelphia, there are tickets that I found that sold. It was a ticket for an excursion to go from Homestead to Philadelphia to see the Centennial Exhibit. It was a one-day excursion, and it went via Hoboken and Jersey City. But they got to Philadelphia. And anyway, this is one of the things they would see at Dorflinger's booth. This is a decanter, and I apologize for the picture, but it represents the United States. It has a U.S. seal and the President Ulysses S. Grant. His name is here. Then 38 wine glasses were made, each with a different state seal. And that was an important key event in Dorklinger. That was important for the American glass industry. Americans started to buy American products, glass products after that. This is another overview of the factory. I think we're looking up the hill toward the glass workers' houses up there. And we're on, not exactly sure what building we're standing on. But if you have glass workers and in your ancestry, definitely check the index to that book. But we also have been trying to document names of workers in old photographs. And this is one that we have a lot of names. I showed you the Laternist who was there in the uniform. Let's see, I can't see it here. One of these kids is a Laternist in the front, in the row here. And anyway, we have a lot of the names of some of these men, and their descendants still come into the factory. My grandfather worked here. My great-grandfather worked here. This is, I told you I would show you some color. This is really, this is a green, this is a showpiece of Dorflinger glass. You can see this at the Eberhard Museum. They have, I think, an example of this, and it's on the cover of the Dorflinger Glass book by John Feldman. This is a detail. It's not a really good picture. But one of the questions that a lot of people ask is, how do you identify Dorflinger glass? And there are three major ways. It's through the quality of the glass, the shape of the object, and the pattern that's on that shape. This is a Flemish jug shaped in the Engadine pattern. This pattern has top stars, and then it has these cut oval. The next piece I'm going to show you is this shape, but in a different pattern. And this is a bad picture of a spectacular piece of glass. We borrowed this. I just returned this to the man who we borrowed it from last year. We had a display of colored glass, and I did polish the silver after it came to the museum. But this was literally taken on the floor of his house. I mean, this thing is probably worth about $25,000. And it's on the floor, and I'm taking this bad picture of it just because I need to document it, because I want to borrow it, but I don't want to take it yet. I need to write up the description of it. But this was a spectacular piece. Turquoise is a very rare color for Dorflinger. Another holy grail, if you're into genealogy and glass, how would you like to find your great-grandmother Celestine's paperweight that was made for her by your great-grandfather? And not only that, this is one of the few pieces of Dorflinger that can actually be identified absolutely. You can't get better than White Mills, PA, 1916. But a lot of these have names in them. Sometimes it has the last name. Some people might say, oh, it's Celestine August something, or it's Aug is the last name. And we know Celestine Aug because we have information about her and her family. And we're always finding more things. This is a paperweight. It's probably only about that big. This is a cobalt over blue, or let's see, cobalt blue over colorless glass. This is in the royal pattern, and this is probably from about 1895. And okay, I only have a few pieces. I'm sorry, I don't have a lot of glasses here, but it's more black and white photos. But this is the Larson home in White Mills. Larsons were a group of Swedish glassworkers who came here in the 1880s, and they were all sort of interconnected. The Larsons, the Falks, the Johanssons, the Janssens, the Jensens. They were all these Swedish glass families came here about the same time, and some of them were interrelated, and some of them were intermarried when they were here. But this came to the museum from descendant, who is a volunteer in the museum. So we have that connection. And again, this is the Larson Falk home, and we do have information about the people who were there. If you're looking for, don't forget the local specialty museums for as a resource. Dorflinger there are not a lot of factory records that pertain to workers. Almost all of those were destroyed. But we do collect information from people who come in, and we collect the genealogies, and there's a lot of research that exists, and there is some material out there. Unfortunately, there's not a list of payroll records, but there are diaries that exist that mention glass workers on that. So there are resources that if you don't know the exact thing, you can get around to. I'm going to zip through these because I see Joe Breyer coming. These are Eugene Dorflinger photographs of White Mills. These are amateur photographer Eugene Dorflinger, but they're professional. These are, you had to be, you know what you were doing to do this. But most of these buildings, these two were just torn down 2 months ago. This is Main Street in White Mills. It's a little wider now. This is the train station looking across at the factory up there in the center. And the Catholic Church is the white splotch on the upper right. Again, looking, coming from Homestead into White Mills. This is the Catholic Church. Going out of town, looking toward Homestead. This is a postcard that you'll find on eBay all the time. Colored, uncolored, but look for these 3 kids in this chimney stack. This is Route 6 going into White Mills today. All of that stuff is gone, but this building is still there. The kids are gone. But this is a copy negative of another photographer's thing, because you can see that whatever they did, I think they shot it on top of a typed letter. We're still typing here. That's in the negative. But the original negative is a Ludolf Hensel negative. And Ludolf Hensel took photographs of all over northeastern Pennsylvania, and that collection is at the Holley Public Library. This is a baseball game in White Mills on a baseball field, and that field is still there and is still used for baseball. But Ludolf Hensel, the Hensel collection at the Holley Public Library has over 4,000 glass plate negatives, and they're scanning those and making them available. But Hensel took photographs all over northeastern Pennsylvania, including Carbondale, Delaware and Hudson Canal views, Archbold. If you're looking for illustrations to spruce up your family history, books and things like that, go to the Holley Library and look for some of the material that's coming from the Hensel collection. But Christy Mathewson played on this field. This is the old hotel in White Mills. The Dorflinger expanded, and then he moved into the family. He moved the family into this. I think this wing was an addition, and that became the family home. This is the family home in 1961 when the owner of it decided to burn it down. This had been vacant for 40 years, and if you want a tense situation, the man deliberately burned it down. It was around Christmas, and they were at the bar with the fire company. He wanted them to burn it down, and it needed to be demolished. It was in bad shape, but it was like, I'm gonna burn that down. You can't burn it down; it's too big. I'm gonna burn it down. No, you can't burn it down; it's too big. You better not burn it down. Well, he did, and they put it out. They put the fire out, but it was completely destroyed. Imagine being in the room with this man's daughter and having a volunteer who lives just up the street bring that up. Oh, it's a shame your father burned that down. Oh, please don't say that. This is almost the end. This is the end of the Catholic Church in White Mills, because that in the 1960s also burned down. I put this in here because this was found in the newspaper archive, from a clipping, and you can go through the old newspapers and all that, but sometimes, and this is when all the genealogy gods are behind you, the photo credit for this was Bob Jennings, and Bob Jennings took photographs for in Wayne County for I think the Scranton Times, but Bob Jennings has, I think, every photograph he ever took. He has the negative. And so if you know that there's a photograph in the newspaper that was taken by that man, you can ask him to make a new print. And that's, I think, 1960, so 47 years later, he was able to provide me with that as a new print. And so if you're doing genealogy research, you want to have that as a resource. We started with a gravestone, and now we're ending up with the funeral cortege of Christian Dorflinger. What time is it?
Almost 9 o'clock.
Okay, I'm going to zip right through this. We got to Dorflinger's death, which is pretty much the beginning of the end of the glass industry in Wayne County. The Dorflinger factory closed in 1921. 1917, they had a disastrous fire that destroyed much of the building. Dorflinger was the central thing in Wayne County for 50 years. And then after that, although there were other factories, this is the Holley Glassworks that started in the 1880s making commercial bottles and commercial items, insulator caps. These are some of the men who were there in, I think, about 1882. Inside the Holley Glassworks. Glassworkers' houses in Holley. These were all washed out in one of the floods in Wayne County. This is in Holley. This is the O'Connor cut glass factory here that started in 1890. Was a cutting shop that cut glass. Dorflinger made the glass. This factory cut their own patterns on it. And if you've ever driven through Holley and see the castle, the antique, that's it up there. That was a silk mill. And I'll get into the silk mills in northeastern Pennsylvania. That was one of the largest. Inside the O'Connor cutting shop. This is an aerial view, this is from Irving Cliff looking over Industrial Point. The center focus is a fire in here. But there are many glass cutting shops that were located in this area here and somewhere along up here on Main Street. There were over, let's see, at any given time, from the 1880s to the 1920s, there are about 24 cutting shops operating in Wayne County at any given time in that time period. This is one of the stone buildings in the middle. If you're documenting old structures and old communities, look to the Sanborn fire insurance maps, because they will give you very detailed drawings of dwellings and industrial buildings. This is for the Krantz and Smith Company. You know, Krantz Brewery is a related family, Feld Brewing, and Simpson. I stuck this in here because my next talk will be in Deposit, New York, so I played to the crowd. This is Kelly and Steinman. These are just examples of some of the factories that continued on up until about 1930, and then with the Depression, changing tastes and fashion, and the cost of producing heavy, there was a heavy labor cost to this. It was all handmade by skilled workers. So this is just one company, the Wayne Cut Glass Company. A letterhead for T.B. Clark, one of the earliest cut glass companies to come to Wayne County, to be near Dorflinger, because he bought his glass from Dorflinger and then cut his own patterns. The Deamer brothers. And a lot of these people started at Dorflinger, worked for other companies, and then opened their own. Gibbs, Kelly and Company. Krantz and Smith again. This is from their letterhead. This is the O'Connor factory in Holley. This is the Keystone Cut Glass Company in Holley. And we think we know these two. This person here, I think, is attorney Sid Crowens from Milford, who I think died a few years ago. These are his parents. And they were friends of the company owner. And this lady identified this, lived in Scranton, where her father eventually went into business with Wickham, and it became Wickham Branding. And I put this in here because this factory was here in Scranton. So it's a Lackawanna County. There were some factories here in Lackawanna County. Wayne Silver Company was started by Dorflinger to put silver on the tops of his glass for 3 or 4 years, and then that went out of business. But this man took it over as a decorator, doing gold bands at the top. And his name was Karl Prosch, and there he is here. He was an Austrian-trained decorator. Harlow Insulator Company making insulators in right here in Holley. Yes. And just, there were women working in some of the glass factories here. They did not work in the cutting department. They worked in the etching department and in the packing department and the shipping department and washing. This is the etching department. They are all drawing on this to create templates for the etching process of glass from about 1907 to 1921. And there were more women in here. This is, let's see, the prothonotary of Wayne County. How would you like to go into the prothonotary and have him identify, this is my mother in a photograph? Sort of going, now I can get anything I want out of this office. As far as, like the clerk of the court. This is again in the, I think in the etching department at Dorflinger. This is just a factory artifact. Can anybody, this is the quiz, can anybody guess what this thing is? You get extra points, and no one from Wayne County who's still awake can answer this question.
An ashtray?
No, it's an ashtray. Everybody, no, okay, most people will say spittoon, no matter what antique you put in front of them, they say spittoon. It's not a spittoon. Although this could be a spittoon.
Air saver.
You'll never get it.
Sit back.
It's an insulator. This was patented, I think, in the 1870s. It's a musical instrument insulator. You take that thing that curves down, and you put that on the bottom of a piano leg. And that will send the vibration, send them into the floor, it reverberates back up into the floor. That came, you can find that in the Google patent search. There it is. J. Siner invented it in 1882. This is cheating because this still has its original label with the patent number. But if you type in that name, you can find it. I don't think he made a fortune on it. This is another view of the glass factory in Dorflinger. I just stuck these in here too. That is what existed in 1885, and at that point there were over 600 employees at the Dorklinger company. So he was by far the largest and most important glass thing in Wayne County. I think that is it. I have some video if you want to see it, but that would be for those who are ready to go home. These are just some, that's an aerial view of those. I think that's the end.
Somebody want to get the light? Very good, thank you very much.
Does anyone have any questions? Please, no? Okay.
My great-great-aunt, her husband was an engineer on the Erie Line
Okay.
Railroad.
Okay.
The story in my family is that she used to get on the train in Scranton and ride it to Homestead and just get a piece of cut glass. So we have and I've been told it was Dorflinger Glass. So I have this china closet, and my sister has a china closet full of this glass,
What time period would
late
she?
1800s, I think.
I think it was possible to do that, and there were jewelry stores in Homestead that represented Dorflinger and sold Dorflinger glass. I would say there were lots of glass companies in Wayne County. It depends on how well off her family was.
They were very well off. The last
Then-
rich person in our family.
Okay.
He
The
was
last rich person
He was
was
a
there.
railroad engineer.
Okay.
That's why they were
Then that's more likely than my great-grandparents from Carbondale going over. It all depends on what their resources were. If they were well off, then they could afford Dorflinger. If they weren't as well off, they might be buying a lower quality cut glass from Wayne County, or God help us, from Germany. You can send me pictures.
And maybe you could identify what
I can try and identify it. If it's Dorflinger, I'll know it right away. If it's not, I can ship this or where it might be. I can't appraise anything.
How about the, okay, what are we wrapping up tonight?
It's a lovely picnic basket.